because I did look at the bio that you posted on the Synagogue's website now, and one thing that I learned that I didn't know about you was this tremendous sense of social justice affiliation that you've had even prior to this trip that you're going to tell us about through your work with the URJ's Just Congregations and Social Action Commission and other pieces. So I hope there will be a chance at some point this evening for people to hear more about that side of your background. But let me also say this, that one of the questions that I get asked most often here at Scarsdale Synagogue is, do you know Rabbi Gordon? People ask me tonight, did you ever meet Rabbi Gordon before? And the answer most definitely is yes. So this last piece is just a little bit more personal, that it's such a treat and a privilege to welcome Andy back tonight and to be able to publicly say thank you to him. Because what hardly anybody else in this room knows is the tremendous, incredible help that he was to me in the months leading up to my arrival here, and when I was limited to phone calls with Rabbi Klein and Rabbi Gordon and Cantor Becker to learn about all of you. So those phone calls and the coffees and the subsequent meetings that we've shared have been the beginning of a wonderful friendship for me that I feel very blessed to be able to have. And so we're delighted that you came tonight to teach us and to share your story. So thank you.
I don't think I've had such a warm welcome in many, many years, so I appreciate it. It's very nice to be back. I was thinking as I was driving here, and I had to go down the driveway, and there was the orange cones there that nothing changes, and everything is the same. But it's incredible to be back, and incredible to see lots of old friends in the room, and to be here tonight to study and to share a little bit about my trip, and also just to think about the issue of racial justice and the challenges in our society. So I wanted to begin with a story. Many years ago, a young Jewish man from Boston had traveled down to Florida for his honeymoon. He and his wife were picked up at the airport by an African-American cab driver. And as they drove through wealthy neighborhoods, they passed by a country club with a large sign out front with the words written there, "No Jews, no dogs." Now this man was shocked. He turned towards the cab driver and asked him if that was common practice down in Florida. And the driver said to him, "At least you made the sign. They don't even mention us." Now that young man, Kivy Kaplan, became an activist and a philanthropist. He marched with Dr. King in Selma, traveled to Mississippi for Freedom Summer, and served as a president, actually one of the last white presidents of the NAACP. Now, late in life, wait, I have one more picture. That's him preaching. Can you see the pictures? I know that some of you are like really far away, but I hope you can see. Late in life, Kivy Kaplan helped found the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. The RAC has a long history of advocacy and fighting for justice and teaching our young people about the Jewish imperative of fixing our world. Now the RAC, I don't know if you can see, it's on Kivy Kaplan Way in Washington, D.C. That's its door. And you can see the long history in the 1960s of fighting for justice, fighting for what's right. And one of the hallmarks of the Religious Action Center is bringing teenagers, usually confirmation students, down to Washington. This on Saturday night, when the weather is not too cold and not raining or snowing, we have Havdalah on the Jefferson Memorial. That's not the Jefferson Memorial, right? Maybe it is. It is. It is in the back. I was looking for the dome. Havdalah by the Jefferson Memorial. It's very powerful. And that's a group of Temple Sinai teens from a couple years ago. A few years after the RAC's founding, the very words of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were penned on its conference room table. Now, Kivi Kaplan was one giant among a generation of Jewish leaders who stood against racial injustice. Abraham Joshua Heschel, in the middle, marching with Dr. King. Rabbi Yochanan Prince, a Holocaust survivor who spoke out against against injustice. And scores of other Jewish men and women and college students risked their lives for the rights of others. They helped make our world a more just, tolerant, and a more equitable place for all. And that's why I'm saddened by the recent news over the last couple months of racial injustice. There are still too many people in our society who face prejudice because of the color of their skin. We've seen parts of the Voting Rights Act struck down, and now new onerous laws making it difficult for many to vote. We've watched as young men around this country, from Trayvon Martin to Freddie Gray to Michael Brown to Eric Garner, fail to make it home. Now, in light of all these events, the shootings, the demonstrations, the rulings, the legislation, Cornell Brooks, the president and CEO of the NAACP, called for a march, America's Journey for Justice. This wasn't any march. It was a 40-day, 1,000-mile journey that began in Selma, Alabama, and ended in Washington, D.C. Why march? Because our lives, our votes, our jobs, and our schools matter. Why march? Because Black lives matter. Why march? Because all lives matter. Now, 50 years ago, just days after Bloody Sunday, Dr. King called faith leaders to join him in a march from Selma to Montgomery. You might have seen the movie Selma, to address the injustice around voting rights. Rabbi Maurice Eisendrath, then the president of our Reform movement, heard that call. And here he is. Oops. Oh, that was the march. I missed my slide. So you can see we started in Selma, and then the march through all of these southern states all the way to Washington, D.C. I personally marched in LaGrange, Georgia. I had never heard of it before, about 60 miles southwest of Atlanta. So there's Rabbi Eisendrath carrying the Torah, marching alongside Dr. King. Now, when our Reform movement heard about America's journey for justice, they pledged that each day, at least one rabbi would march, and a Torah would start in Selma and would march the entire way, all the way to Washington. I was with a group of rabbis, and we were getting tired of carrying the Torah. It wasn't just the rabbis, everyone carried the Torah, so we thought, we'll put the Torah on the bus. There was like a bus that was riding behind us for a couple, like an hour or so. And the fellow marchers, I was 10 days in, started to yell at us. The Torah marches the whole way. So the entire distance, the Torah marched. Now, alongside me on my march were dozens of others of all races and religions. And in the heat and in the humidity, with sweat pouring down my face, 100-degree heat, I marched carrying the Torah. So I wanted to share some pictures. So this was the night. You can see how well manicured I am. This is the night before I marched. So these two guys in the yellow shirts are rabbis who marched the day before me. All the other people around are, except these two, I think I cleaned up. I don't know how they got cleaned up. But the four on the right side were my fellow marchers. And every day we took a picture of the passing of the Torah. So for my day, I was the shomer. I was the Torah guardian. I had to make sure that the Torah was given to me, and for the 24 hours, I had to make sure that the Torah didn't go out of my sight, and I had to make sure that I passed the Torah on to the next shomer the day after. So we had a Torah backpack in case it rained, and to transport it from place to place. But when we actually marched, the Torah was never in the backpack. It was always in our hands. So here's us marching. Unfortunately, I'm like, you can't see me, I'm like over there. But here's our group of marching. This is in the middle of Noonan, down Main Street of Noonan, Georgia. So I was marching with Tuvia, who's from Baltimore. It's me carrying the Torah. You can see I'm a little sweaty there.
Thank you.
At the end of the day, because it was a Thursday, a day traditionally that we chant from the Torah, I chanted a little bit from Deuteronomy. So every day we tried to share a little bit of Judaism with the fellow marchers. Me with two of my rabbinic friends. And the Georgian ladies. Okay. Now, the Georgian ladies were one of my highlights. Let's see if I can share this video. Let's see. I'm not the most technologically savvy.
That's funny.
So the other video I wanted to show, unfortunately it's not working, but I'm going to share. Okay, let's see. Go back to current slide. Okay. So these ladies were one of the highlights of my trip. They lived locally, just a couple miles from where we were marching. And they had come to help out for the march, to serve some food, give us some water, help with logistics. But as they arrived, our marchers convinced them to march with us for the first couple of miles. And the entire time they marched, and every time I saw them, they were singing, the whole time. Now, one of the songs they sang was, I'm not Canterbecker, I'm going to try to sing a little bit. Which I had the video of, and it unfortunately is not working. Ain't gonna let nobody turn us around, turn us around, turn us around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn us around. We're gonna keep on a-walking, keep on a-talking, marching up to freedom's land. It's very powerful. You can imagine you can imagine them singing it. So they gave us a huge strength and spirit, and they reminded me about how far our society has come over the last 50 years, but also how far we have to go. And their singing reminded me why I was there, to march for justice and freedom. Now, I learned so much during this march just by walking and talking and journeying along my fellow marchers. And I would like to share some of the stories that I heard, and I hope that together we can think about ways that we can bring justice and compassion to our world. So that morning, I sat down for breakfast with Royal. Royal lives in Ohio, just a few hours from where I grew up. And Royal shared how terrified he is when his teenage son gets into the car and drives away. Now, I thought about all the parents who worry when their kids get behind the wheel for the first time. And Royal worries about this too, but it's not his only concern. Royal fears that his son could get pulled over for the crime of driving while black. Could his son be arrested, or even worse, never make it home? Now, carrying a 20-pound Torah in 100-degree heat isn't easy. And as I marched next to Royal, the Torah truly became a burden. It wasn't the weight that bothered me, but it was its values of justice and righteousness that bore down on my soul. And I couldn't help but think about the prophet Isaiah, whose words often move me because of their focus on justice. And even more powerfully, it's these words that our tradition teaches should be chanted on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, when we reflect upon our responsibility to repair the world. Cry from the depths, says God. Do not hold back. Lift up your voice like the shofar. Royal's cry and the cries of millions of parents like him sound like that shofar, awakening me from my complacency and my comfort. I thought about all the times that I want to lock the doors of my car, and I reflected upon all of my prejudice and all my own discomforts. And since that moment, I've been searching my own heart about the issue of racial injustice, challenging myself to look at my fears, and challenging myself to understand the benefits of being white, and finding ways to create equality and fairness for all. Now later that day, I marched alongside Sheila. There's a connection to the Midwest here. Sheila's from Detroit. And Sheila told me that Sheila's concerned about the next generation. She told me that those without an education in Detroit can only find work as a restaurant server, making the minimum wage, barely enough to make a life. And Sheila described the pain she feels for those stuck in the cycle of poverty, whose schools fail them, and whose job prospects are dim. Now, Sheila truly inspired me because while I was marching with her, she got a job offer. And just this past September, she started a new job, tutoring high school seniors, providing them with the skills in math and science that they need to move forward with their education and their dreams. And as I marched alongside Sheila with the Torah in my arms, I thought back to Isaiah. Words from Yom Kippur. Is not this the fast I desire, to break the bonds of injustice and remove the heavy yoke, to let the oppressed go free and release all those enslaved? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and take the homeless poor into your home and to never neglect your own flesh and blood? Very powerful words for this mitzvah weekend. Now, without a doubt, our schools are failing many who live in low-income areas, and this disproportionately affects students who are black, because our schools are more segregated now than they were 40 years ago. There are so many barriers that prevent us from fixing our schools, yet Sheila did not throw up her hands and walk away. She acted, and she's doing her part to better our world. Now, I know this community very well, and I know that there's many at SSTT&E who volunteer, from the grassroots to government, philanthropy, hands-on work, and these acts make a huge difference here in Scarsdale and Westchester and around our country. But we know that there's so much more that we can do, both individually and as a community, to tackle racial injustice. And I wanted to share just a couple of things. Some are easier than others. These are small steps, but I hope it will push us to do even more. Now, on your tables, there are some petitions, and there's some postcards with Rabbi Eisendrath traveling with the Torah. And it's easy, one easy thing to do just tonight is to sign that petition. In 2013, the Supreme Court struck down sections of the Voting Rights Act. And since that time, many states, most famously North Carolina, have passed laws making it difficult for thousands of citizens, often people of color and the poor and the elderly, from accessing the ballot box. Now, we know that there's nothing more unjust than preventing citizens the right to vote. So I hope tonight and over the Mitzvah day that you can take a moment to fill out the postcard. This postcard was sent to hundreds of Reform congregations all over the country, and so ours will be joining with them to hope that will spur the President and Congress to act. This year, I urge you to study and to learn more and to open your minds. There are many books that have been written in recent months that address race head-on. And one of the books that's impacted me the most is Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. It was written as a letter to his 15-year-old African-American son, and it powerfully describes race in America today. I hope that you'll read the book and that it will challenge you to think about our world and to think about race in a different way. This year we can build a better community. All of us have close relationships with people of all colors and races, our families, our loved ones, our friends, our community around us. And now is the time to discuss these issues openly, to not shy away, to discuss race and religion and justice and hardship. We know that when we open ourselves up to one another, we can uncover new truths, deepen our relationships, and work together to heal our world. And this year, I urge you to become an activist. SST-T&E, along with Reformed congregations all over New York State, are part of Reformed Jewish Voice of New York, and we're part of the Religious Action Center. Whether it's a local issue, a national law, our community needs leaders who will help advocate for justice and equality for all. I know these are small things, but I hope that as we begin to start down this path, that we can truly study, build relationships, and encourage us to do even more. Now, as the day grew hotter, I marched alongside Keisha, and I learned her story. Keisha and I bonded the night before. This is us. This is where I slept the night before in a high school gymnasium. They set up, you can kind of see the cots. And I was, this is dressed down Rabbi, wearing my University of Michigan t-shirt where I went to college. And Keisha is from Ann Arbor. So she saw my shirt, we took a selfie together. So Keisha told me her story. In 1996, the Ku Klux Klan chose Ann Arbor, Michigan as the location for its next rally. A small group of Klansmen showed up wearing their white robes and their conical hoods. And across the way, there were hundreds of others who stood together in a counter rally. All was peaceful until a woman with a megaphone yelled out, "There's a Klansman in the crowd." A white, middle-aged man wearing a Confederate flag t-shirt with an SS tattoo on his arm stood in the middle of the counter demonstration. That's him. Shouts of "Kill the Nazi" were hurled at him, and he began to run away. As the protesters ran after him, they pushed him to the ground, they began kicking him, and they began hitting him with sticks. Suddenly Keisha, then only 18 years old, a high school senior, threw herself upon the man, protecting him from the blows. Asked why she did this, she shared, "I knew what it was like to be hurt. The many times that happened, I wish someone would have stood up for me." So there she is. You can see they had like the old school signs with the wood to hold them up, and they were using that to hurt him. I asked Keisha later if she ever spoke to that man whose life she saved. She never did. But one day she was at a local coffee shop, and a man stopped her, a younger man, and thanked her. "What for?" she asked him. "That was my dad." Now Keisha's act not only changed one heart, it transformed the trajectory of her life as well. Like Kivy Kaplan and those who came before, experiencing hatred and hostility pushed Keisha to become an activist. Now Keisha started the journey in Selma, and she marched the entire way to Washington. 40 days. Every rabbi loved Keisha, and we all have selfies with her. She's an incredible human being. And her plan is now to move to Detroit, Michigan. She's setting up a nonprofit organization to help start new businesses in Detroit. Now we know we all can't be Keisha, but we can possess her willingness to see each other not by the color of our skin, but as other human beings. Now this Shabbat, I am honored to be with all of you. It's wonderful to see everybody, many old friends. And as we gathered for food and drink and for celebration, Isaiah's cry still summons me. "Is not this the fast I desire, to break the bonds of injustice, to remove the heavy yoke, to let the oppressed go free and release all those enslaved?" Isaiah calls me to recognize my prejudice and my fears. He calls me to act, to do my part, to not remain silent. But it's not only Isaiah who calls me. It's Royal and Sheila and Keisha and millions upon millions of others who cry out, their voice like a shofar for justice and equality. They remind me and us all that we have the power to heal our world so that no one feels injustice or hatred or discrimination for who they are. And like those Georgian ladies, may we join hands and march together to freedom's land. Thank you, everyone. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm happy to, if you have anything about the march, the journey. Someone asked me before, so every day the plan was to march about 20 miles. I personally, so our day was 18. I thought it was a good Jewish number, a little high. For the march, we would march three-mile chunks, and then a bus would be waiting for us. And so at that moment, you could go to the bathroom on the bus, and you could take a break, and then 3 miles, then you had to make a split decision. Did you just kept going? Am I going to march 3 more miles, or am I going to stop? So they made everyone take at least 2 breaks. So I marched 12 miles. Now, I was thinking, no, 12 miles, that's not very much. But 12 miles in 100-degree heat, 100% humidity, in the blazing sun, you felt like you were going to die. So it was very incredible. Yeah, please.
I was from afar seeing all of our colleagues with this march, and
Sure.
Throughout the summer, throughout the 40-day march, our colleagues posted every day the passing of the Torah from Team A to Team B, and so on. And so, somewhat involved, rabbinically in the field, I kept up and kept abreast of what was going on through Facebook.
Yeah.
But I wonder, I'm not out of the mood to be able to answer this question, how much press did the real world get? It was.
No, that's a great question.
Like, was it sort of insular within the NAACP world? I don't know.
Most of the press that, at least that I saw, was rabbis reaching out to the local press. From their communities. So, like someone like Jill Perlman, who I marched with, who's a rabbi in Lexington, Massachusetts. She contacted the local, Lexington paper, and they ran a story about her. She reached out to them. Most of the press were not. I didn't see anything like in the Times about it or in any of the major newspapers. So unfortunately, I was speaking to someone earlier today who said to me that there was 1 million people in Washington D.C. this weekend. And I was like, I didn't even know about that. Unfortunately, these things don't get press. When someone gets shot or when there's violence, it does get press. And I think that's one of the lessons I've learned from this is that when you want the press to learn about it, you've got to reach out to them because they're not going to find you. Yeah.
When you were marching in these small little towns, how was the spectators? Were they?
Sure. So when I was marching, what were the spectators like? I guess I don't know if it's unfortunate or not unfortunate. The 6 miles I did not march, there were a bunch of Confederate flags. So I never saw a Confederate flag when I marched. I would say 90% of the people were encouraging, honking their horns, thumbs up. What are you marching for? That's great. Of all colors. There was a few people, most of them more towards the right, who were upset. There was a lot of police that were involved. Because we were marching down a 2-lane road. And we were marching on one side, and on the other side, cars would go back and forth. So for a while they would let cars go the direction we were marching, and then they would stop, and then cars from the other direction would go. So there's a big log jam of cars in a place where there's never traffic. So we heard from some people that they were upset by the traffic. Some people more on the right said that we were wasting tax dollars. But most of it was very. I I was expecting the worst, and it was very positive. I mean, the other thing to add to that is when you look at Selma and the march 50 years ago, and you see that the police officers were preventing them from marching, and not only preventing, but actually injuring, like using their weapons and beating people and causing death. To see the police officers there on our side, taking pictures with us on the Torah, stopping there, you realize our society has not gone as far as it needs to, but in many ways it's gone much farther than even we expected.
I'm sorry, how many did you say were marching?
So every day is different. I marched on a weekday. It was on a Monday in the middle of nowhere in Georgia, so we had about 40 people with us. When they marched through Atlanta and Charlotte and some of the major cities, there was hundreds of people that were marching with them. And then they had a huge rally in Washington, D.C., where thousands of people. Yeah.
Who were the sponsors?
So it was the NAACP that sponsored the march. They did a similar march last year after what happened in Ferguson. So they marched from Ferguson to, I don't know, it was like a one-day march, and it was very successful. And so they wanted to, some of the issues that we care about, our voting rights, our schools, jobs, economic issues, that each day they did a teach-in. So one day there was a teach-in on the Voting Rights Act, and another day there was a teach-in on economic issues. And so every day at a different church, we were at an Episcopal church in LaGrange. They would do these rallies to kind of get their supporters, geared up for Washington and to advocate for positions. Oh, please.
Were other religious leaders involved? Was this only
Sure.
rabbis and Jews?
It wasn't only rabbis and Jews, it was Reform Jews. No, seriously. There were a couple conservative I've heard throughout the trip there were a couple conservative rabbis and a couple of Reconstructionist rabbis, but our movement made this commitment to do this and to be there. And they needed 40 rabbis. I don't know when they made this decision. Rabbi Seth Limmer, who's a rabbi in Chicago, he's a big social justice advocate. He's on the NAACP board, and when he heard about this, he said, "I'm bringing rabbis, and I'm bringing a Torah." And they said, they needed 40 rabbis, one rabbi every day. It was almost 200 rabbis who signed up to be part of it in one way or another. But other religions, there were African-American pastors, but there were not many other, there weren't, I didn't see like the Episcopals there or the other religions. No, it was a lot of Jews. It was. It's in our DNA. Really, and it's in our history. Yeah.
Rabbi Gordon, let's
Sure.
do one last question here.
Sure.
And we're going to have dessert out. And
Wonderful.
If you're able to stay.
I'm here. I'm here to schmooze. Great. Any other questions? Yeah, please.
What kind of follow-up after the march is there planned?
Sure. So, so there's a group of rabbis called Rabbis Organizing Rabbis that is to push rabbis to do this type of work. So they're gearing up to try to push rabbis to do work in their local communities. I know that the Religious Action Center, that's part of our reform movement, is working specifically on the Voting Rights Act right now, but it's going to be working on other issues as well. I think our relationship with the NAACP is huge, and there's a lot of issues that overlap, that we all care about. And so I think going forward, we're going to continue to create even deeper relationships. But it's just a start. It's one step in the journey. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Okay. So first of all, just further proof that Rabbi Gordon and I operate on the same wavelength. If you come back tomorrow morning to study with us, Isaiah 58 will be one of the texts that we're going to be looking at more closely.
We didn't talk about this
We did not. So It was great, amazing. And I also, like Elise said, had the chance to follow along online over the summer. But this brought it to life and with such dimension. And thank you for taking the time to put together the PowerPoint with the photos and the videos. So one last time, a round of applause for that. First of all, I want to direct your attention to the tzedakah boxes that are on your tables. These were boxes that were crafted by SSTT women at the Women's Retreat several years ago. And if you haven't already put a small tzedakah gift or a large one in the boxes, you're welcome and encouraged to do so. All the money collected tonight will be donated to the rack so this work can be ongoing. So that's one thing. How about this? How about this? Before you make your donation, we're almost done, but we're not done. I want to invite up Barbara Barron, who... No. Karen Chaparral, who has just a small token of thanks for Rabbi Gordon.
I just want to say what I said to Rabbi Gordon earlier today, that when a group of us came up with the idea of inviting him, I was so excited, I thought I was going to fall into a depression if he couldn't come.
You picked a good Shabbos to do this.
And it was more inspirational and powerful than I could have imagined. I thank you so much. And this is just a small token of our appreciation picked out by Barbara Barron, although she didn't want to come up. But thank you, Nay. And there's also a card. And I am going to collect these. If I don't see you, you can leave it on the table up front, and I'll get it and make sure it gets where it goes. So, thank you, Rabbi Gordon.
Stone and spirit. Thank you very much.
So please stick around and have some coffee, schmooze with Rabbi Gordon. Shabbat Shalom.
That was really nice. But how many days did you do it? He did it so he had 40 people. I hope you're okay.